Oh, hello, Internet. 60x Self. I would like to read you a story today called Burning Rubber by Dakota Walker. It's brief, it shouldn't take up too much of your time, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. Let's begin. But allow me to interject before I forget. There's a warning on this story for violence and graphic imagery. Enjoy. The day started out as any other, with the alarm blaring, violently pulling Henry McClure from his deep sleep and telling him it was time to begin the day. He reached out blindly for the clock, his hand groping for the ever-elusive snooze button. His hand finally found it, depressing the button and ceasing its harsh cries. Henry craned his head over to make sure his wife was still asleep. Of course she was. His Margaret could sleep through just about anything without being disturbed. Sometimes he envied how quickly and deeply she could fall asleep. God knew his sleep was often light and restless. Henry slowly pulled the covers back and crept from the bed and headed toward the bathroom. He began brushing his teeth, studying the man in the mirror with fascination. His once dark brown hair was now speckled with gray, the lines in his face becoming more prominent. My God, when did I start looking so old? Well, it had to happen eventually, I suppose. No one gets close to 40 without something to show for it. He finished his bathroom routine, got dressed, and checked the clock. Its block numbers read 646. Perfect. He had just enough time to eat a small breakfast consisting of a single egg white on plain toast, kiss Margaret goodbye, and be on the road before 7. That gave him a good 45 minutes to pick up a cup of coffee and arrive at the small community bank where he worked with 15 minutes to spare. He lived by his father's motto: if you aren't willing to show up early, then don't show up at all. He had lived by this motto for as long as he could remember, and it always served him well. With his tasteless breakfast consumed, and the last kiss he'd ever give his wife placed on the soft spot of her temple, Henry walked out the door. The cold November air numbed his exposed skin almost instantly. The sky was dark with storm clouds. A light rain, little more than a mist, endlessly fell from the blackness above. But despite the bone-chilling wind, Henry found beauty in the morning. Something about being up before the sun rises with the cold nipping at him, the wetness collecting on his skin, the sound of the frozen ground beneath his shoes crunching with every step he took, the way the air puffed out of his mouth. It was comforting and peaceful, and made Henry glad to be alive. He stood next to his small car, breathing in the chilly air, before taking his keys out. He took one more deep breath of cold before unlocking his car and getting in. As Henry waited for the car to heat up, he reached over and turned the radio on. He tuned it to one of the 2 local classic rock channels, happy to hear one of his favorite Led Zeppelin songs playing. What a great way to begin the morning, he thought to himself as he backed his car out of his driveway. 6 minutes later, he pulled up to the window of the coffee stand. He ordered a large coffee, paid for the sludge, and thanked the barista. The heat from the cup began transferring into the hand holding the cup when Henry realized the barista forgot to put the little cardboard sleeve on the cup to keep it from burning your hands. Careful not to spill it, he went to place it in the cup holder. He was paying attention to the road and failed to realize the holders were already occupied by 2 half-filled coffee cups, just like the one he currently held in his hand. The new cup hit one of the older ones, popping the lid off and sloshing searing liquid on Henry's hand. "Fuck!" he screamed. "I always forget to throw those damn things out," he thought absent-mindedly, as he placed the cup gently between his legs. "If I'm not careful, I'll burn the hell out of my legs, not to mention my balls." The car came to a halt at the intersection before the highway on-ramp. While he waited for the light to signal it was his turn to move, Henry shifted the cup, slowly burning his inner thighs. He fumbled with the lid and, in his frustration, accidentally folded a side of the cup, sending more liquid onto his pants. Luckily, he was wearing black slacks, or else it might have stained. His face twisted into a grimace of pain as he placed the lid back onto the cup with a satisfying pop. An angry thought passed through his mind. Fuck these damn cups. I ought to go back and give that coffee girl a piece of my mind. But if he did that, he wouldn't arrive to work early. And if he didn't show up early, he may as well not show up at all. The light changed, and thoughts of going back to the coffee stand left his mind. He turned left toward the on-ramp, unknowingly turning towards his doom. Another Zeppelin song came on just as the current one finished up. The radio DJ claimed it was the hour of Zeppelin, and he was merging onto the highway. Once he merged, he reached over and turned the volume up, careful not to move the cup of Magbum between his legs. He sat back in his seat and began singing along, letting his mind wander as he drove. His thoughts went to Margaret's birthday, only 4 days from now. He had bought her a nice pair of sapphire earrings, knowing it was the only piece of sapphire jewelry she didn't own. He planned to take her to her favorite Chinese restaurant and give them to her in a small box he bought for the occasion. She didn't care for surprises and would constantly remind him. This little fact had drilled into his head over the last 11 years of marriage, but that never stopped him from surprising her anyway. Henry enjoyed the look of surprise on her face. It seemed to light up her features, giving her a look of eternal youth. He knew she'd tell him, I hate surprises. How many years must we be together before you figure that out? But it would be a tone that suggested humor rather than malice. Then they would finish their meal, head back to the bed they've shared together for so many years, and have tender, highly satisfying sex. I should pick up a card before... The thought was cut off as a red Toyota shot past him on the highway, speeding and weaving through the thick morning traffic like a madman. Whoever was driving misjudged the space between the two cars ahead of Henry. Instead of merging, the Toyota's back smashed into the Honda in front of Henry. The Honda's tires squealed as the driver smashed on their brakes. Henry slammed his own brakes down, but failed to stop his car from smashing into the back end of the Honda. His head flew forward, connecting with the steering wheel hard enough to send bright lights into his vision. His teeth bit down on his tongue, the taste of iron suddenly filling his mouth. The cup between his legs exploded as his thighs tightened up against the crash, the burning liquid covering him from his chest down. A warm red stickiness began pouring down his forehead, and in his daze he wondered how the coffee managed to splash into his hair. The two cars, their metal melded together, came to a stop 20 feet from where they connected. The driver of the Toyota had managed to turn into the shoulder, safe from the wreck he had caused. Seconds later, the sounds of a horn, shrieking tires, and compressed air brakes filled the morning. Henry had just enough time to glance in the rear-view mirror, noticing it wasn't coffee dribbling down his face, but blood, and see a diesel truck flying at him. Time seemed to have slowed for him, the world gray and moving an inch at a time. His senses seemed to heighten, able to pick out every detail in the moment of his death. He could see the frightened look of the truck driver as he slammed on his brakes and pulled on his horn, could smell the sour aroma of burned rubber across the hot asphalt, felt every nerve in his body jiving around, tasted the hot blood seeping from his cut tongue. "This isn't really happening, is it?" he asked himself. Then time reasserted itself, and the diesel smashed into his car. The sound of crushing metal overtook the world. Pressure filled Henry's body, rupturing and exploding his insides. Blood flew from his gaping mouth and nose in a flood, his eyes bulging in their sockets, threatening to pop right out of his head. A piece of jagged metal slashed the inside of his calf to the bone, adding more blood to the already growing pool beneath his seat. Henry tried to yell, to scream, to say anything, but all that came out was a few quiet whimpers and a mouthful of blood. Suddenly, he felt very tired, despite the terrible pressure coming from everything from the neck down. With his head lying against the steering wheel, he thought of Margaret and the earrings he had hidden away. His last conscious thought was of how beautiful she looked when she was surprised. His chest hitched once, his lungs slowly letting out the last reserves of air they held. Darkness spread across his vision, and Henry knew no more. So, what do you think? Did you enjoy Henry's story? I'll put a link down below for where you can buy a copy as well if you would like to read it yourself or just support the author. If you enjoy what I have done with the story, please like, subscribe, follow everywhere you can. Facebook, please. Show your support here, and I will find another short story. If there's a short story you would like me to read, please suggest it. Ideally, something that I could conceivably get permission to do. Bye, Internet.